Hello, and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group Biweekly Sync. It is December 6th, 2018. I can't believe we are flying through the year. We're almost done, but we've got a couple more calls before the year ends. And so, of course, we always like to start off with a quick discussion about, or quick mention about what these calls are about and why we have them. So this is part of the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program. And we have these calls because we were kind of a victim of our own success in a way that we were not able to really cover all the topics we wanted to on our monthly calls. So we split out, and we now have these bi-weekly special interest group calls. This one is focused on client-side development and the PnP suite of client-side related tools, which we'll talk about on the call here. And we have our opposite special interest group call. I say opposite because it's on opposite weeks. So every other week, and that call is around PowerShell, CSOM development, a lot of provisioning conversation in there as well. So obviously attend all the calls you would like. We are always happy to see folks in the different calls. So please do join the calls. Love to have you here. And so in this one, we talk about specifically SharePoint Framework and client-side development patterns associated with that. We talk about the PnP JS libraries, the Office 365 CLI, the SPFx PnP reusable controls, and the SPFx PnP Yeoman generator, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but is the newest addition to the suite of PnP client-side stuff. So moving on, I got two links down there at the bottom. The first, aka.ms SPPnP-community, and that one's going to take you to the Microsoft Tech community, to the SharePoint section of the Microsoft Tech community. That's a great place to ask your general questions that don't necessarily pertain to a specific library. How would you design? How would you architect? Things like that. That might not be, an Office 365 CLI question or a PnP JS question specifically, that are more general. So always a great place to ask those sorts of questions. And then spdev-docs. Down there at the bottom is a link to the all-up SharePoint developer documentation. So if you're new to the SharePoint framework and looking to get started with that, you can walk through the Getting Started guides, and it starts off with how to set up your development environment and takes you all the way through developing your first Webparts, your first application customizers, and then on to deployment and performance concerns and some more advanced topics as well. And in addition to the SharePoint framework, the documentation, of course, includes the documentation around the managed code development. So whether you're doing classic WSP deployments on premises, or you are looking to do add-in development, you can, of course, all of that will be there as well. So very much appreciate everybody checking that out, and of course your feedback. If we have mission documentation or places we can improve it, we certainly appreciate that feedback. But as always, we might not always be able to act on it immediately, simply due to time and just personnel constraints, quite frankly. So we're doing our best, but do let us know, and that way we don't lose track of it. It'll stay in the issues list. So definitely appreciate everybody's feedback there. So moving on, our agenda for today's call, and I do apologize, I'm getting over a wonderful week-long cold, so I apologize if my voice kind of is a little rough today. But excuse me, we've got our engineering update on SharePoint Framework. We've got patterns and practices updates around the PnP JS, the CLI, the reusable controls, and the Yeoman generator, and two great demos, both of which showing off some capabilities from the SPFx 1.7 release. So Chris Kent doing a great filter pack Webpart demo, and then Paolo Pialorsi doing a dynamic data Webparts demo as well. So awesome new capabilities there, going to be shown off in those demos, so definitely stick around for those. And then a Q&A, open discussion at the end. We'll see, as always, we have time for that. But you can always use the IM window to have the conversations as the call is going on. So before we get started, always like to mention as well opportunities to participate in the PnP SPFx and the JavaScript Special Interest Group, or in the larger Patterns and Practices programs specifically. So we always, you can also always demo SharePoint Framework, something around SharePoint Framework, or something using any of the PnP, any or all of the PnP projects, so the CLI, the Yeoman generator, the PnP JS libraries, or the reusable controls. All of those are great, and I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it. The demos are really, I think, the most valuable part of these calls, because we all get to learn from each other. We get to see some of the awesome work folks are doing out there in the community, and you get to show off the awesome work you're doing. So get a little bit of visibility and get to sort of get a nice forum to present your work. So really appreciate those demos. Love to see those demos. If you'd like to do a demo and want to get involved, all you have to do is reach out to myself or Vesa. Hitting us up on Twitter is a great way to do that, and we'll see about getting you on the schedule. We won't always be able to get you on immediately the next call, but it just depends how things are scheduled out, but we will get you on a call. So just reach out. Love to have those demos. Let us know. Certainly encourage you to do that. As I've said, I do think it's one of the more valuable parts of the call. In addition, you can always contribute on GitHub. So you can contribute across any of the PnP projects, and we always welcome, all of us across all the projects, appreciate your reporting any issues you might find, ideas to make things better, or as well, we take somebody. Gonna go ahead and mute that person. There we go. Do please, if you join the call, join in on mute. It really helps us out with the recording. So you can always contribute by reporting issues on GitHub, or as well, we always accept pull requests if you're looking to get involved and contribute that way by contributing code. Appreciate that as well. And that's across all the projects. Absolutely welcome your participation. And then finally, you can always provide feedback, general feedback on what we're doing. So on these calls, general feedback on the samples, documentation, things specific to the different libraries, whatever. We love to hear that feedback. We do internalize it. We do discuss it. We do try and adjust what we're doing based on all of your feedback. And again, I always like to mention we can't always react instantaneously to feedback, but we do appreciate it, and we do want to get it from you so that we can kind of get it into the queue and see what changes we can make to accommodate that feedback that's been provided. So please keep that coming. It really makes us better, and all of us benefit from that feedback, in that we get, hopefully, better programs, better samples, and better libraries out there for everybody to use. In light of getting that feedback, we're close to ending the survey, but we're going to keep it going just a little bit longer to make sure folks have a chance if they'd like to have their voice heard. We are kind of asking out there, are we having too many calls? Should we drop the monthly calls, keep the special interest group calls going, drop the special interest group calls, keep the monthly call going, something like that. So, or, of course, keep everything exactly how it is. Always an option as well, but you can respond. There's a link down there at the bottom. I think it's the 3-question survey form, aka ms.spdev-call-feedback. If you've already given us your feedback, thank you. We very much appreciate it. I think we've had, about 70 folks, I think is the last number I heard. It's either 50 or 70, so within a 20-person range there. But appreciate your feedback, and we'll talk about the results of that survey probably the beginning of the new year, new calendar year. And I'll just tell you right now, the feedback is essentially keep things the same, so that's great. But if you have thoughts or ways we can make the calls better, or feedback generally about the calls, this is a great opportunity to drop that into the form. And just let us know. Let us know what you're thinking. We'd love to hear from you. So normally this is where I'd hand things off to Vesa, but Vesa is on a much-deserved vacation today. So I will be covering the SharePoint Framework updates for today. Always like to start off again mentioning the SPDev docs. This is where you can go for all your documentation and guidance, not necessarily just around SharePoint Framework, but around all of the SharePoint documentation, developer documentation. This is now content managed in GitHub, but it shows up in the docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint. We've got almost 1 million views in October. Time to update this slide since we have our numbers for November. So really check out that developer documentation, as I mentioned at the top of the call. That's where we're trying to put all of the SharePoint documentation. And there's links at the bottom, of course, to provide feedback on the documentation that actually goes and creates an issue for us in GitHub. And again, helps us track and improve that documentation, which again benefits everybody across the community. So let us know what you think. Check out the documentation. If you are running into issues for SharePoint Framework or issues in services related to SharePoint Framework, do check out aks/spdev-issues, and this will take you to the issues list that we are using. We across the programs are using to help with SharePoint Framework. So this would be stuff if you're seeing something in SharePoint Framework that's not working, or stuff related to SharePoint Framework. So some of the graph authentication services, for example, stuff like that. Please let us know. This isn't necessarily the place for general SharePoint feedback. That might be more appropriate for user voice, places like that. But definitely, if you're unsure, let us know, and we can help triage it. We'd rather hear from you than not hear from you. So please do get any comments, issues, things entered into that list. You will notice there are a lot of issues in that list. We are working to get that number down, get responded to stuff. A lot of it is honestly just old, and so has probably been fixed or addressed by now, and we just haven't had a chance to go back and maybe close those issues or respond to them and say that they should be fixed. So we are working through that. Trust us there. That's going to take a little bit of time. Again, it's just, everything is a resourcing challenge. So, but do always let us know if you find issues. Let us know. And always happy to get that stuff in there, and it at least gets it logged and makes sure it's visible to the right folks. So, of course, some folks, we still get questions. SharePoint Framework, how is that being adopted? How are third-party solutions being adopted? Are people actually using the SharePoint Framework? So we always do like to mention that, yes, folks are absolutely using the SharePoint Framework. We aren't allowed to give you numbers, but we are allowed to show you a graph that goes up. So usage is going up. So encourages you to definitely check out SharePoint Framework. It is the direction of SharePoint development for the future, and I will just hint and say it's not a bad technology to learn for the future of Microsoft development for all of Microsoft 365 online. So just a hint, just gonna mention that out there. Y'all take that for what you want, but definitely would recommend, if you haven't gotten involved in SharePoint Framework, and I imagine most of the folks on this call have, but if you haven't, encourage your friends, encourage your peers, encourage your businesses to start looking at SharePoint Framework. It's definitely a great platform to learn, and should be applicable outside of just SharePoint in sometime. That's I can't really say any more than sometime. So, latest release of the SharePoint Framework, version 1.7 has been available. That was released the beginning of November. That has a couple great new additions to that, dynamic data being one of them. We're going to see some great stuff on the two demos from Paolo and Chris today. We've also got SharePoint 2019 on-premises support is now built into the 1.7 Yeoman generator. You've got domain-isolated Webparts, which is similar to the old add-in model with the iframes. That is very important for certain security scenarios. So definitely check those out if you need a little bit more high-security Webparts or need some isolation. And then, of course, the Teams tab option is going to be super powerful and is the kind of thing one might look at as how things might go in the future. hint, 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 and support for Teams apps in SharePoint. So that's kind of a two-way thing back and forth. List subscriptions and a single-part app pages in 1.7 are all coming along. You can, of course, find the usage guidance there at aka.ms SPFx, and that actually, I believe, takes you to the SharePoint Framework specific documentation section of the SharePoint Framework docs that we talked about a little bit ago. So definitely upgrade to 1.7 if you get a chance. And I'll mention it again later, but the Office 365 CLI can help upgrade your existing projects into the latest versions of SharePoint Framework. So it's a nice shortcut, saves you a little bit of the manual, update work on that. So getting started on building Microsoft Teams tabs with SharePoint Framework tutorial is available. You can find that at SPFx-tutorials, aka MS SPFx-tutorials, and that is a really great walkthrough of one of the new features, one of the new capabilities in the 1.7 release that was often asked for and allows you to create essentially SharePoint Framework solutions that are then surfaced inside Microsoft Teams. And that's it really opens up a lot of sort of cross-platform, powerful scenarios for write once, use many times, that kind of a thing. So definitely check that out. And certainly excited to see what folks are doing with that. So if you've done that and have a cool demo around a Teams tab, I don't think we've had one yet from the community. I hope I'm not forgetting one. We've had a couple of just the very basic. Vesa did one, I believe, on the very basic how to do this. Would love to see what folks out there in the community have come up with. So check this out. If you do end up doing something with it, let us know. We'd love to have you demo that on the call. So that's another great demo idea for folks. And then we had a line of business solution demo that was used in the SPC keynote and at Ignite, and that is now available as a sample, so you can see how that was done. So if you saw that demo at either of those conferences, or if you've just seen it in the recordings, you can now find that demo and all the source code behind it and see exactly how that was done. And that is at that URL there that I won't read the entire thing of, but you can find that. It's under the SPDev Solutions folder there in the SharePoint org on GitHub, and it's the Leads LOB Line of Business Solution. So definitely check that out. Another great way to see how things are done, and it's also a nice way to see how folks from engineering imagine the various pieces of SharePoint framework being used and being used together, which I think is always insightful. And so I think this is the last slide in this section. This is the roadmap. Always, of course, subject to change. SharePoint Framework 1.7 was released on the 8th of November. Big themes for SharePoint development. So we have no ETA currently. Everybody kind of knows nothing really much happens in December. Folks are closing things out for the year and finishing some stuff up. But looking at getting preview capabilities shipped. So that would be a lot of what's in preview now behind some of the preview flags in SPFx, so getting that stuff GA'd, stabilizing things, of course responding to the issues we hear, working on performance optimizations, always adjusting the features. That's both driven by internal needs as well, of course, as your feedback. So we very much appreciate the feedback. It does help drive things, even if it doesn't seem like it happens immediately. Those things are taken into consideration. We are still working on an overall store experience for SharePoint Framework Solutions. That's getting a lot of attention. I know it hasn't seemed like it may be in public, but that is being worked on. That is coming. It is frankly just a much more complicated problem to solve well than you would think. with all the different things that go on behind the scenes. But that is coming. We are working towards that. And then exploring options to use SharePoint Framework with other services. This is something that somebody's been hinting about on this call. So a similar model as with Teams, but sort of expanding that development model to other things across Microsoft 365. So keep an eye out for that. And like I said, if you haven't learned SharePoint Framework, now is a great time to get started because it is a model that's going to have legs and is going to really give you a way to do development throughout the platform in the future. So now, moving on to a quick update on PnP JS client-side libraries. Our 1.27 release is planned for December 7th. If you're here listening to us today, that is tomorrow. If you're listening to this call later, that is December 7th. So that will be very soon, or perhaps has already happened if you're listening to the call. That's going to include a whole bunch of stuff from the community again. Great contributions again this month. So I want to say thank you to everybody. We'll be getting that out. I did want to mention we're starting to think about what 2.0 might look like. I've added a new label to the issues list for PnP JS that conveniently enough is roadmap, and that is just sort of general bucket topics. They're not super specific, but I wanted to kind of put out there what we're thinking about, get your thoughts from the community, so feel free to comment on those issues. And leave feedback around those. If you have an idea for 2.0, something maybe you would like to see us change or do differently, please post that. I can never remember if folks can add labels themselves to the issues. I'm not sure you can, but just mention that you are saying this is like a 2.0 roadmap idea. We can get it tagged up for you, no problem. But no target date on this yet, but the idea would be a 2.0 is obviously a major breaking release, so would love to use this as an opportunity. So if you have big ideas, this is the time to get those out there so we can discuss them. Not promising we can do everything everybody wants, but definitely this is the time to discuss them. So if you have big ideas, please do let us know. Let's talk about them and see what we can do. And this is honestly going to be sometime next year that we'll do a 2.0. It's kind of a big undertaking to switch over, and I know it's a breaking change for folks, and we really like to limit that as much as possible, but want to start thinking about it, want to start those conversations. As always, thank you to everybody that has contributed in the last month, and always, but specifically in November, and we'll get all that out as the part of the release tomorrow. Two links down at the bottom, PnP, github.io/PnPJS gets you all the documentation, and you can follow the hashtag PnPJS on Twitter. And I just realized I've deleted my Twitter handle off of the slide somehow, so you can always follow me at MediocreBowler on Twitter, and pretty much I just tweet about PnP JS, so you won't get a lot of spam or whatnot from me there, so you can definitely check that out. So updates now on the Office 365 CLI, and I've just realized I should have done, I forgot. I should have done the November numbers for PnP JS because we have those now, and I apologize, I forgot about that. But I will mention, for the first time, PnP JS crossed over 2 billion requests a month. Came through the library to SharePoint Online. So just wanted to say, huge accomplishment for the library, and really great work by all of you in the community, and that's a testament to all of you using it in your solutions and giving us feedback, making it better, making it more useful. So 2 billion, a great milestone, and we'll talk about that more on the next call when I will remember to include the numbers. So apologies for me forgetting that. Office 365 CLI. If you haven't had a look at this tool, this is a great cross-platform tool that has some excellent capabilities, very similar to the PnP PowerShell, but works cross-platform as a Node NPM installable module. Current version is 1.9.0, and that the biggest new capability there is the ability to upgrade solutions from SPFx 1.6 to 1.7. So love for folks to try this out. Like I said, with the release of 1.7, it's always nice if you can go back and update your solutions to get both the stabilization enhancements, but as well as the new capabilities. And Office 365 CLI makes that even easier. So you can just run a command and update your solutions to the latest version. So in progress, you can manage webhooks, list content types, uploading files to specific folders, and of course, working still towards getting a cross-platform equivalent to the PnP Starter Kit setup script. So working on that, you can install this npm install-g to the @pnp/office365-CLI. You can follow Office 365 CLI hashtag on Twitter. There's a Gitter channel, and as well the docs link, aka MS0365 CLI. Will get you all of the documentation on the CLI. So super valuable tool, especially if you're not working on a Windows machine, will allow you to do a lot of the same things as the PowerShell, but cross-platform. So super valuable tool, definitely check that out. SPFx reusable components. Again, if you haven't had a look at these, it's a great way to kind of jumpstart your SharePoint framework development. There's two separate packages of reusable controls. The first is the property controls, and those are used in the property pane. So when you go to edit your web part on the page, these allow you to have various pickers, color pickers, people pickers, taxonomy pickers, and really build a rich editing experience without having to yourself write a lot of code to do that. So these are drop-in, ready-to-go controls. And then the React content controls are controls designed to work inside the body of your web parts. And those controls will, again, jumpstart and save you a lot of time in having to recreate this functionality yourself. Both of the controls are styled with the Office UI fabric, so it gives you a nice out-of-the-box look and blends easily into the rest of your application and the rest of SharePoint as a whole. Some recent highlights: the property pane web part information control, property pane property editor control, and the list item picker for both content and property controls have been added recently. Great stuff. Really shortcut your development and save your time. This, and I should have mentioned as well, the CLI are great places to get involved, and PnP JS and the upcoming Yeoman generator. Great places to get involved and contribute. So if you have a control you've worked on and want to potentially add it to either the property controls or the content controls, absolutely welcome that. Absolutely would love to have you submit that as a pull request. Same with the CLI if you have ideas for commands. Same with the Yeoman generator if you have ideas for enhancements and capabilities there. Just want to keep reiterating, definitely welcome folks from the community getting involved. Oh, excuse me. And finally, the Yeoman generator here. So if you haven't checked this out, this is a newer project. It's now been going on for at least a few months from Stefan Bauer. He started it, but we've also had a lot of community involvement here as well. And what this is an extension of the out-of-the-box at Microsoft/SharePoint Yeoman generator, and it's an extension of that. So when you generate a solution using the open source generator, you're going to get a SharePoint framework solution with all the same back-end code, all the same back-end references, libraries as you would with the SPFx generator, but you have some additional setup options. So options around frameworks like Handlebars, Vue.js, and different frameworks such as Angular Elements, stuff that isn't included in the out-of-the-box Yeoman generator. So a great way to have some expanded capabilities if you'd like to use Angular Elements, for example. This provides you a little bit easier way to kind of get that project started, but again, end up with all the same back-end references and code as you would using the out-of-the-box Microsoft SharePoint Yeoman generator. So, and recently, package update checker added and domain isolation option added. So these are options that were exposed Well, some of these are options exposed in SharePoint Framework 1.7 that are now surfaced in the open source Yeoman generator, and some of them are nice enhancements just found in the Yeoman generator. So definitely check this out. It's great capabilities, great addition to your arsenal of tools from PnP, and you can get that more information at pnp.github.io/generator-spfx, and then you can always install it from npm install-g/@Microsoft generator-SharePoint. And I think that should be at PnP generator-SharePoint. So we will update this slide. We will check on that. I'm not 100% on that. I don't know if Stefan's on the call or could correct me there. So now we'll hand things over to our two demo folks today. So Chris, if you're ready to go, I think you're up first, showing new filter pack web parts and dynamic data. And hopefully I will be able to see your screen when you share it.
Well, let's hope and pray and whatever else. Okay, let's see. Hit that button. Like that. 1 second here.
And Stefan is saying it is at PnP generator-SPFx. So apologies for the typo on the slide. We'll get that fixed up. So I see loading on my screen.
Oh.
Oh my gosh, and I see a screen. This is amazing. Take it away, Chris.
All right. Go that. All right. You guys see the screen. Okay, there's me. All right. So my name is Chris Kent. I'm the Office 365 practice lead for DMI at Indianapolis. You can catch me on the Twitter tweets, where I will tweet you spam, unlike Patrick. So you can also follow my blog there. I'm an Office Development MVP and a member of the Patterns and Practices core team. All right, let's talk about this filter pack. Woo! Okay, so it's available here at github.com/pnp/filterpack. This is an extremely early preview, so just keep that in mind as you're looking through this. Things will be changing. I would love to get ideas added to the issues list, questions, suggestions, all that stuff. Hit us up. And you'll also notice we mentioned the React controls and the PnP property pane controls. Both those are in full use all over this filter pack. So let's take a look. So back in the old days, way back when, we used to have these filter web parts, right, where we could go in there and we could set up these really clunky, kludgy kind of filters, but it worked pretty well, right? You could filter your document libraries, your lists. With dynamic data, that's all so much better. And what the filter pack is going to enable some of that same kind of thing, but a much smoother, user-friendly way. And by using these, you can build a full-on application without ever having to really do anything with code. So your business analysts or your power users can create dynamic pages or applications, just putting together a few of these web parts and stringing them all together using dynamic data. So, all right. So what is in the filter pack? So there are currently, 5 different filters, and there's this kind of simplistic dynamic value here. We'll take a look at the dynamic value first. And the idea of the dynamic value is you can go grab a source. For this sake, we'll take the page environment. We're going to take this wonderfully named query string here, which is actually user data. All right, and so now we've got our username showing up right here. We have this very limited currently template idea, so I can say, welcome myself. Right, and so that's a nice way to put some dynamic things on the page. You can connect to anything that's providing that dynamic data, and you've got some formatting options around that. Likely going to see this change quite a bit to provide several more options there. So let's take a look at one of the actual filters and how we hook that together. All right, we'll delete that guy. Let's add a filter in. So one of the simplest filters is a simple toggle filter, right? So it's going to add a true or false kind of value for yourself. So you get a few things here. You can change some of the text. Let's add a result here. So the way dynamic data works is it's web parts or extensions talking to each other. So let's grab a dynamic value and hook it up. All right, so we're going to configure that. We're going to grab the source of the toggle filter. We'll take the filter value. All right, so as we mess with this thing, wow, it's magic. It's very fancy. All right, over here we can choose to send that value as text, should we want to, right? So now we want to send on or off instead of true or false. We can customize that, whatever we need. So we've got some options there. So you can start to imagine that in a very basic scenario, right? If you want to turn certain things, you want to filter based on, a category or something else, you can change those words to categories here and then have it just be on or off. All right? So let's go ahead and add a label here before I forget. All of these have this label option, right? So we'll just do that so we can always tell what we got going on. I'll bold that sucker. There we go. All right. So now let's try another filter here. So that's the toggle filter. Very, very exciting. Let's try one that's a little more exciting. If you can believe it, let's grab the number filter. So a number filter has this nice slider option by default, right? Let's hook this back up here. Ignore that. Number filter, filter value. That's a dynamic data fun thing. Early preview, remember, early preview. All right, let's grab that dynamic value here. We're going to configure, we're going to grab that number filter. All right, we got the filter value here. All right, so there's our 60. Drag around. We get this nice thing going here. You can also choose to make this vertical. All right, you can change that height as needed. All right, let's put it over on the left. So you got a lot of options here, including the minimum and the maximum value, right? So we can turn that minimum down. So as you see, you start to get some really nice customizable pieces to this. All right, so now we can come up here and we can say, you know what, that's nice, but I want to be able to enter the number directly, right? So we can go to a field. All right, you can come over here, you can click that thing, change your step values, again, your minimum, maximum, add decimal places, you can add a suffix, right? So it's not part of the value to send, but it's a nice way to provide a hint for what you're actually adjusting. All right, so as you adjust that, you get the pixels or whatever else you wanted, right? And you get those values sent over. We even have the ability to do a rating. Now, you probably don't want 41 stars, so let me adjust that down to, let's say, 5 stars. All right, so you've got 5 stars, so you can send that value over that way. All right, let's make those tiny. So you get that. It's all pretty easy, pretty well to do all that stuff, and that's pretty fun stuff. And we can go even further, right? So let's grab ourselves a people web part. Let's delete this guy. All right, so we have a people filter. As you can imagine, it's pretty similar. We'll grab a dynamic value as well, just so we can show that it's working. Okay, let's configure that. Source people filter. And we're going to take in, let's say, the email address, right? So when I come over here now, I could pick someone from my environment. So I can pick myself, now that email address is sent over. We can do all sorts of cool stuff. Now, if you want to change stuff around here, right, you can set up the, by default, the current users, what goes there. Let's add a label people filter. You can also say what kinds of, filtering you want to do on that status set that comes back. So you only want to include users, but you want to include SharePoint groups, all that kind of stuff. You can also choose, right now, by default, it's just one user at a time, but you want to bring in multiple users. All those will come across semicolon separated. You can even, in some of this advanced stuff, say you don't want to pull users from your current site, you can specify the URL for a completely different site and pull users from there. And you can also filter it by group. So just put in a SharePoint group name here, and only members of that group will be selectable. All right. Sounds beautiful. It's wonderful. All right. Now, that's cool. Right? We're not really seeing, where do I use these just yet? And so a more practical example is probably easier to see with our choice filter. So let's go grab, we'll make this, what's this, 2 columns. That'll be easier. Let's go grab ourselves a choice filter. All right, so a choice filter, by default, is pretty basic, pretty simple. Right? So it's got 3 little choices in here. You can manage those choices. So if you want to manually input what's the key and what's the value, you can do all that. And that's fine. But even more advanced is hooking that directly to a list, right? So I'm going to go out and I'm going to grab this list that I've got prepared called parent stuff. All right, so in that I've got a list of pet types and some tools, because that makes sense to have in the same list, right? Let's put a thing here, it's called pet type. We'll call it that. I'm going to switch the view. I'm going to go just pet. So I'm going to go ahead and filter that down. So I just have my filter. It'll notice all the order and everything else with your view is all going to be taken into account. So now we've got this beautiful choice filter. Got that dynamic value here. Let's add one of those. Okay, let's take it from our main choice filter there. And we can do the filter key or the filter text. All right, so we'll just show that we've got the hamster going. And so on and so forth. But that's cool. But how about something a little more advanced, right? So oftentimes you get the idea of what's called cascading drop-downs, right? You're going to pick your province or country, then you're going to pick your state, you're going to pick your city, and so on. So let's add ourselves another choice filter. we go. All right, so this choice filter is also going to be from a list or library. This time we're going to pick from child stuff right there. Okay, and so in this list, we've got a list of different types of breeds, right? So you can say including some tool breeds. Why not, right? So we've got all these different things, but how do we make it so that when we pick dog, we only show dog breeds over here? It's pretty simple. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a filter right here. Let's add a label first before I forget. So let's call it breed. Okay, I'm going to add a filter here. In this case, I'm going to say parent ID, right? So this is a lookup on that list. Parent ID equals, I'm going to grab the first choice filter, and I'm going to say filter key. Simple as that. So now I've got just my dog breeds here. So I've got hamster, and so on and so forth, right? So now I've got a nice cascading dropdown, and I can continue to send that. I could send one or more of these to various dynamic parts here, or when the first-party web parts come out later, I think it's early 2019, where you can start to hook into those, you'll start to be able to apply these filters there. All right, so we can go even a little further if we wanted. All right, let's add a whole nother choice filter. All right, we can nest as many of these as we want together. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the grandchild list, all right, which has got all the names of my pets. All right, so I've got my pet name. All right, so we've got Phil there. We're going to add a filter to this one. And again, we're going to say child parent ID equals second choice filter, and I'm going to say the filter key. All right, so now, if I choose dog, I get all the Shiba Inus, right, and I get all my pet names here. Now, what if you've got something like, I got hamsters, whatever I got, right? But what if I got a poodle, right? And here, this list is fairly long, right? And I want to add a whole nother filter on top of this. So I can do that. So that's where this other filter, it's a pretty simple filter, but like the text filter really comes into play. All right, so we'll add the text filter, and we're going to add a label called starts with. That sounds great. And then we'll come back over here, and we're going to add one more filter down here. So we're going to add another filter, and we're going to say where the title, let's say, starts with, we'll make it case insensitive. And we'll grab that text filter, and we'll grab that filter value. All right, so now, if I hit S, you start to see that I begin to get results down here, right? So as the helper, whatever I need, right? So again, this is pretty helpful. So you can imagine you start to build a full-on application. You bring in other web parts on your page. And you can bring in through query strings or various other things. You can make a pretty dynamic page and a full-on application for your users without ever having to do anything but configure web parts. One thing I failed to mention here is that each of these web parts has a sync with query string option. All right, so if I want to sync with query string, you'll see that it adds this nice little CHF up here, which you can change that to whatever you want. So if I want to make that parent, right, I can make that. So now as I pick these guys, you can see all of that gets remembered up there. So if I do the same thing over here where I add sync with query string, we'll make this CHCF. All right, now when I refresh this page, well, let's pick at something else. We'll pick Puma. All right, I refresh this page. Let's remove all that. You'll notice here that the query strings, I automatically get my default values set. So that allows you to create some really dynamic pages that are directly linked and can have preset filters and everything else ready to go. Okay? All right, that's basically it for now. There are plans to add additional filters, say date time filters, maybe a taxonomy filter. If you've got other ideas for other filters that would make sense, or you want to add additional options or values or abilities to these kinds of things, please open up that issue list. Again, it's PnP Filter Pack. Let me grab that. Throw it on that list. I'd love to hear from you, or you can just reach out on Twitter, whatever you guys want to do. But that's it. But again, this is just kind of the practical implementation of dynamic data. Dynamic data is awesome, and you can do all sorts of cool stuff. So you can go ahead and take a look at these. They'll probably change a little bit as we get ready for the first-party web parts that are coming early 2019. But in the meantime, you can begin to consume and use these things with hopefully some of the stuff Paolo is going to show you here directly within your own web parts. Okay? All right. Thanks, guys. That's all I got for now. Unless anyone has questions.
Awesome stuff, Chris, and also would be a great example of just how the dynamic data works. So good stuff to check out. My only real complaint is you didn't have a rabbit pet type option, but I think we can overlook that for today.
We were all out of rabbits. Someone used them all up in their PowerPoint. I don't know.
Oh, well, we'll see about that. So, luckily rabbits are good at making more rabbits. Paolo, I think we're ready to transition over to you, sir.
Okay, here I am. Let me share my screen and let's start with my demo, which is still related to the dynamic data topic, but now we will see how you can create your own client-side web part using the dynamic data functionality introduced with SharePoint Framework 1.7. So, first of all, let me know when you will see my screen. Most likely still loading.
I got it on my end.
Okay, so let's start. First of all, here is the sample in action. It's a couple of web parts based on fake data just for the sake of showing you a demo of dynamic data. And here we have a list of customers. And as you can see in the lower part of my screen, I have another web part which updates its content based on the currently selected customers. So if I get customer 002, I will get the same customer here. I will get a fake list of orders for that customer, just to give you an idea of what you can do from a business perspective if you want to play with dynamic data. Of course, in a real scenario, it could be that you will get the list of customers and the list of orders using, for example, a third-party API registered in Azure AD and using yet another functionality introduced with SharePoint Framework 1.6. But now let's dig into the details of how you can implement such kind of web parts. First of all, notice that now I'm showing the property pane of the orders web part, which is the one connected, if we want to use an old school terminology, so the connected web part rather than dynamic ones. This web part is connected to the other one, and as you can see, the customers web part, which is the one in the top area, is the data source for my consumer web part, and I'm consuming a property called customer because the customers web part will provide the single selected customer in the UI. In order to have this experience for your end users, let me switch to Visual Studio Code. You can build a solution based on one or more client-side web parts. Here, for example, we have the customers web part, which is the main one. You can think about it as the data source or the source provider for the dynamic data. And in order to create such kind of web part, you will need to have the web part or any other object in your solution implementing the dynamic data callables interface. I said or any other object because this interface can be implemented by a web part directly if you want to have all the dynamic data source logic inside the web part, or you can even create your own type implementing this interface, and you will use that type as the engine for the data source, which can be then used and published through your client-side web part. But first of all, you have to implement this interface. Well, the dynamic data callables interface requires you to implement two different methods. The get property definitions one, which is the one you use to declare what are the properties that your data source will provide to any data consumer. And the get property value method, which accepts a property ID string argument. The property ID string argument will be the ID of any property that you provide through dynamic data with your data source. So here, for example, I provide a property with an ID customer and a title customer. And whenever I get a request to get the property value for property ID equal to customer, I will return an instance of an object, which in my scenario, in my sample, just implements an customer interface that I still define in my solution. Moreover, when you create a data source, so you implement the interface, you implement the get property definition and get property value methods, and you have to register your data source as an available data source in the current page context. You do that using the context of SharePoint Framework and using the dynamic data source manager object and the initialize source method. As you can see here, I provided this, which means the current web part, but as I said, it could be any other object that you have in your solution as long as that object will implement the dynamic data callables interface. Moreover, whenever in the UI I select any of the available customers, I simply notify any subscribed data consumer that I have a new value for the currently selected customer. And I do that still using the SharePoint Framework context, the Dynamic Data Source Manager object, and using the notify property changed method. I provide the ID of the property that has been updated or which just changed, and I use this method to notify any subscriber. In my solution, the customer is an interface that I defined with 3 different properties: the customer ID, the name, and the email. And that's why in the UI, as a consumer, I can just consume the whole customer object, or I can make a subscription, a connection, just to get a specific property of the customer object that I get back from my data source. It is up to you based on the web part that you want to use as the consumer of the data source. If I go back to Visual Studio Code, we have to see how to implement the consumer side of the story. The orders web part is another web part in my solution, but could be something else. For example, you can mix the filter pack made by Chris and your own custom web part, just to make an example. Here we have a client-side web part called orders, which first of all has an interface to define its properties, which uses the dynamic property of T, where T is the type of what we want to consume through dynamic data. In my scenario, for the sake of simplicity, I have the data source, which provides a customer, and I have the data consumer, which will consume exactly the same object, the iCustomer instance object. But it could be something else. When you declare a dynamic property inside the properties of your web part, you make it possible for your web part to get that dynamic data value from any external data source which is compliant with the dynamic property type that you will accept. Moreover, you have to create a properties metadata method through which you will declare what is the data type of every single dynamic property that you can accept with your consumer web part. The available types or the supported types are Boolean, number, string, array, or object for any complex type. In my scenario, I'm using as a data contract between the two provider and consumer web part the iCustomer object, and that's why I declare that the customer dynamic property will be of type object because it will be a complex object. Bear in mind that you should use a flat object and not a deep hierarchy of properties inside the object, or at least if you will do that, the dynamic data engine will flatten your object across the dynamic data transfer. So generally speaking, better to use a flat object with just a flat set of properties rather than a hierarchy of complex types. Again, it's up to you. Moreover, once you have declared what are the properties metadata for your dynamic properties, you can also, and you should also, make it possible for your end users to configure your web part, to connect your web part with the data source. And that's why in the get property pane configuration, which is a well-known method that we have in any client-side web part, we can use the property pane dynamic field set, which is a new type introduced with the SharePoint Framework 1.7 release. And this one will be a set of property pane dynamic field properties. So here, basically, I'm declaring the outline of this UI in the property pane, and I'm declaring that I have a dynamic field, which is the customer one, I mean this guy, which is a dynamic property of iCustomer, and I declare that I want to have this one as a customer source, which can be configured in the UI. You can also play around it and, for example, make the web part which can be connected to a data source or can be just configured using explicit values provided by the end user. It is up to you to make it more or less complex based on your real business needs. So now, once you have your consumer web part with the dynamic property, you declare the type of the dynamic property, and you made it possible to configure the connection with your data source, you need to get the real value, the actual value from the data source. And first of all, you can do that double checking if the customer dynamic property of the properties that you have in your consumer web part is configured or not. In fact, if you use the try get source method, you will get back a Boolean response which will let you know if your web part is connected to a provider data source or not. In my scenario, if it is not connected, I will use a init configuration Boolean property of the React orders component that I use under the cover of my web part in order to show the placeholder component from the PnP React components, and I will simply allow the users to configure the web part. In fact, in the order TSX, I simply say in the render method, if I need configuration, let's show the placeholder and instruct the user to configure the web part. On the other side, for example, in my scenario, in the React component, which is the one really rendering the orders of the currently selected customer, I can do the try get value method invocation to try to get the value of the currently selected customer, which can be an iCustomer instance or undefined if I don't have any available or any selected customer. Well, if I don't have any selected customer, just for the sake of giving a better user experience to my end users, I still use a placeholder and I say, please select at least one customer. On the other side, if I have the web part configured and I have my customer data, I simply render my UI using the data coming out from the data source, as well as rendering a fake list of orders which are generated on the fly using some random code, because as I said, this is just a sample demo. So that's the story. So you need to create the data source one, implementing the dynamic data callables, and you have to provide the properties and the property values. You have to register your data source and to notify the consumers whenever there is a change in the data source. And on the other side, you use a dynamic property of T to declare that you accept a dynamic property value for your web part. You declare what is the type of any of the dynamic properties that you will accept. You make it possible to configure them, and then you can do the try get source to see if you are configured, and the try get value if you want to get an explicit value, if any, for your dynamic property. And that's it. Really, really simple, in my opinion, really easy to create client-side SharePoint framework-based connected web parts. And I think that's it for me as well, Patrick. So back to you.
Great stuff, Paolo. Thank you very much. Cool to see under the hood of how that stuff's working. Some great techniques there. And this is, of course, available on GitHub as well, that sample, I believe. Paolo, that's a true statement?
Actually, not exactly this one, but we have another example that we made available under the PnP GitHub repos, which is based on events and a map which will render where the event will take place. But it's almost the same story, a little bit more complex with events, list, and locations and stuff like that. This one is easier whenever you want to transfer the basic idea, in my opinion. That's why I'm using this one. But maybe I will add this one to the repo as well.
Awesome stuff. So great demos. Thank you, Chris and Paolo. If you would like to do a demo on the call, please let us know. Just you can ping myself or Vesa on Twitter. Would love to hear from you. I haven't seen a ton of questions that didn't get answered, but Russ is asking a question. How will we know when the out-of-the-box web parts start becoming providers? There will be some kind of an announcement around that, right? So we'll probably talk about it in this call. I imagine there'll be updates to some of the documentation there, sort of the same way we get all of the messaging out. So, but as well, that'll come in time as things are worked on there. So great demos. Awesome stuff to see today from everybody. Don't really have time for Q&A, But want to mention our next meeting for the SPFx JS meeting will be December 20th. I know we're getting into sort of the end of the year holiday season, but we will have a meeting for the SPFx SIG on December 20th. The next general dev SIG is on December 13th. That is next Thursday. So hope to see everybody there. And then we will certainly move this along. And thank you, everybody, for joining the calls. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions. Really appreciate everybody's work out there in the community. And thank you, of course, to Chris and Paolo for the great demos. And everybody say hi, Vesa. Hope you had a good vacation. So talk to folks soon. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.